Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Giant Pod with me, Andy Wrintmore. I sat down with Peter Mcfadyen this week. We talked about pirates, we talked about his upbringing, we talked about fairness in the family home, we talked about being a compassionate undertaker, we talk about charity work in the disability realm in Uganda and with Comic Relief. We talk about local politics. We talk about reclaiming local politics with the Independents for FROME. We talk about Flatpack Democracy. We talk about the books Flatpack Democracy. And then we talk about pirates again. Here it is. Yeah, we're on. We're going.
Okay.
I went out the side door down this side of the building on the right, and you weren't there. So
Sorry.
I thought, oh shit, he's on the other side door. So I ran to that, and for a minute I thought, where is he? And I found you wheeling and dealing a very, very small bike.
Wheeling and dealing a small bike.
What's the story there? Why is there a big shed for
a grandson? A need for a bike. I saw the ones in the car park. I was going to go to the Jumble at the weekend.
Yeah.
I didn't make it. Pick up a bike for me grandson, and then I just happened to find them available. So there we are, done deal. Nice little bike.
It looked all right.
Yeah.
Are you going to go through it and do all the brakes?
Does need a little bit of that.
Yes, a little bit of that. That was kind of when I was a kid. All of our bikes and stuff with my dad, he was always, checking the bloody brakes and everything. And I had mates who didn't even have brakes on their bikes. They sort of stripped them. So I only had one on the back. And then,
or a front brake only, which is not such a clever idea, really.
No, I don't think so. And I remember one day, one of the older kids, we used to go out in like little BMX gangs, and one of the older kids took my little reflective bits off my wheels because it was, this would be much cooler without these. And I was like, yeah, no, you're right, because no one else. Dad went absolutely spare. What's he doing taking those off there? Why is he taking those off there?
Probably put them on his own bike.
That's for your safety. The cars won't see it now. Oh dear. So this podcast is all about sort of interesting people doing interesting things, and I think so far you're meeting that criteria. You're a funeral director. Are you an undertaker? Is that what you'd?
Same sort of thing.
Same sort of thing. You're a pirate of sorts.
Yep.
You're bringing down the government piece by piece.
Definitely.
And probably so many more things. A social enterpriser.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we begin? Where does it start with you, PMAC?
Some of those things are rooted in ancient history.
Right.
I think, in the sense that I realized the other day that I've always been interested in being on the other side. I've been having a bit of a pirate sense.
Yeah.
We were talking about this in terms of moments you were proud of on some conversation I was with the other day. And I remember I was offered the role of head boy at school, and I turned it down to the horror of my parents, and not my parents actually. They were not bothered. My grandparents. It's like, how could you possibly do that? But it's like it's that whole thing. I don't want to be part of a club that'll have me.
Right.
So, I mean. And,
you're an outsider.
Yeah, I am. And it seems have always been in quite a quiet sort of way. So I'm not a very loud rebel.
Right.
I'm more likely to be sort of round the back, sort of prodding people. Not, that sounds like a sort of torture, doesn't it?
You're an organizer, I'd probably say. So instead of being out there, being the sort of the front, the face, some sort of like James Dean look, cigarette hanging out your lips, whatever. You're in the back making it work. You're in the engine room.
I've always been the producer to other people's directors. So the two proper jobs I've ever had in whatever, 50 years, 40 years, in both cases I've had very charismatic directors.
Right.
So I first worked with disabled people in Cornwall with a guy who was incredibly influential in lots of ways about disabled people taking risk. So it was the place I worked was all about people coming who otherwise were sort of cotton-wooled by society,
right,
and saying, you can come here for a week's course and go cliff-top walking and abseiling and all sorts of taking risks. And then we had loads of staff and volunteers. So actually it was really safe. But, but my role in that was to kind of make things happen very much in the background. He was the person who'd sort of say, why don't we do cliff-top walks with the blind? And whatever. And my role was to sort of gulp a bit and then work out how we could do it. You know? Right. And then when we came to FROME, I worked for another charming, charismatic leader called Chris Underhill, who set up Action on Disability and Development. And well, his first idea was to send me to Uganda, where it happened there was a civil war still going on. And I did go to Uganda.
You did?
Yeah, and had a fantastic time. It was the end of a civil war. But again, my role with Chris was he'd have 10 ideas, a couple of which would be absolutely brilliant, a couple of which would be totally disastrous, and then a lot in the middle. Right. And my role was to try and get the good ones to work, you know, to lose the silly ones quietly.
And does that take like some sort of tack with these kinds of people? Do you have to figure out how you're going to almost sort of manipulate them into agreeing with you that those are the good ideas? Because they're probably going to be set on the batshit crazy stuff, aren't they? You have to sway them into the more, as you said, the brilliant ideas that are probably a bit more practical. How do you do that with such strong, big personalities? It takes a little bit of chess, I imagine, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think chess is right, because it's not going to work by... You definitely can't do it by confrontation or by, I'm not going to do this, it's a mad idea. Because that would almost cause them to want that idea to happen. And they are ultimately the boss, you know, so they can say, no, we are going to do this and you've got to make it happen. So yeah, losing things quietly, I suppose, partly. And then, you're right, making things happen in other ways, more gently. I think that has been my lifetime role, really. Being in the background, it is more, as I said, more of a producer's role than a director in terms of films or productions, I think.
Right. And who's led you down this path? Did you have particularly radical parents, or did you grow up with, you know, rogues on the TV? Who were your heroes when you were growing up? Because I've always been attracted to rogues and people that do things a bit differently. I don't know why. But I am. So I think we're kindred spirits in that regard. Yeah.
I don't... There was a guy called Fergus O'Connor who was an Irish rebel. I was called Fergus at school, including by the teachers. It became a nickname just because... so he was an independence for Ireland many, many years ago. So he was... I don't know if he was a role model. He was just a name. But my parents actually were quiet and very... They were really into fairness and into doing things right, social justice. So they were role models in that sense, definitely. My dad was, and my grandfather, you know, they were heavily into all things environmental and green and gentle and right in that sort of way. And as I say, very hot on fairness. So to the extent that I had 3 siblings, and one of the things that I remember is on a Sunday we got a Mars bar after Sunday lunch, but that was cut up very carefully so that you cut sort of 2 bits in the middle, but then the 2 ends you cut sideways so that everybody got an equal amount of chocolate, because otherwise the ends would get more chocolate. I just remember my dad...
Because it slopes down on the...
somewhere or other, but, you know, so that everybody...
that sounds like OCD.
Yeah, exactly. I think... I'm sure you're right. I think there was definitely an element of that in terms of fairness.
And who got the caramel left on the knife?
Good point. I imagine, my mum probably licked that when she was doing the washing up and didn't tell us, but she was secretly getting that extra bit of caramel.
That extra caramel.
But I don't think I did have... Oh, yeah, no, actually I'm wrong. Of course, George Best, who was my long-term hero and still is. Although I watched something the other night which did rather taint that, I have to say. It was a really, really good documentary about George Best. But
it's the footballer, right?
Yeah, footballer. Yeah. And there was a bit of wife battery that I didn't know about, which is kind of a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it gets you there, doesn't it? Yeah. That was the same with me and James Brown. I was watching this James Brown documentary and I was like, this guy is amazing. He has captured both sides of, he's captured all audiences with his music. He was an icon and a statue, like a pillar of strength for the black community, and then goes and hits all his girlfriends.
Yeah, not so good, really.
Oh my God. Like, for God's sake.
I know. The number of people who must be not knowing what to do with their Jimmy Savile badges or their Jim will fix it badges and their who's the Australian dude?
Rolf.
Rolf,
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Harris, who everybody loved and collected his paintings and watched his TV show. It's a kind of it taints your heroes a bit when things like that when it goes wrong, doesn't it?
Well, they say never meet your heroes, don't they? And I know that means don't meet them in real life because they're probably far different to how you've built them up in your mind. But it's definitely as people grow older, and the media and the paparazzi and journalism gets more and more intrusive, and more. It gets deeper into people's lives. I think more and more crap is coming out about people that could have been.
I know, sad. Well, maybe most people have a dark side that they don't want revealed. But George was my hero because of his rebelliousness,
right?
Definitely. That he did what he felt like and walked out of things. And the same way as Eric Cantona was, because as you can probably get, there's a Man United thing going on here. But his resignation at 60 when he just said something along the lines of, when asked so what's all this about, Eric? And he said, when's a sardine follows a trawler, it is time to leave, or something like that. Something completely enigmatic and meaningless. And anyway,
right. Well, enigmatic and meaningless all at the same time.
At the same time.
That's quite something. So so where'd you go from Cornwall with your disabled assistant job?
Cornwall was disability, as was FROME. So FROME still has an international charity that works with disabled people, which is its headquarters is about 200 yards from where we're sitting. But its work is in Africa and India and other countries. And it was set up to support the rights of disabled people. Right. So it basically said that most disabled people don't want charity. Actually, they want to have basic human rights. They want to be able to get married and have jobs and have somewhere to live, and they don't want to be in homes for disabled people or whatever. Because of course, there's no anyway. It's there's no difference, is there? If you walk out today and fall off your chopper and lose your legs, it doesn't. You're still Andy, aren't you? It doesn't change you ultimately. Anyway, as we know, disabled people tend to be often put outside of our society. So it was all about trying to support groups of people in developing countries, and still is. That's what it does. So I spent 10 years, I suppose, a lot of the time in other countries, in Africa and India and
yes, this is the role that sent you to Uganda. Is this right?
Yeah.
So what was Uganda like? What were you doing there? so you're on the back of a civil war.
Yeah.
Your boss says to you, "Hey, I've got this brilliant idea," and you think, "Right, how am I going to play chess with this one?"
I was too young then. I didn't have that.
Oh, you didn't have that sort of insight.
Where's Uganda? Yeah, sounds fun. I think I'll go there.
Oh, and there's a civil war.
I didn't know that, Ben. So, but by that stage, I was already married to Annabelle, who I still am very married to, and so she was left here, and found out some days after I'd gone, she went. Somebody said, "He's gone where?" And she was really cross because there was this is all pre-email, pre-any contact at all. So I disappeared for a month into Uganda and had a fantastic time because it was the end of the civil war, so it was like liberation. So this is the end of Idi Amin, Obote, some horrendous dictators that Uganda had for nearly 30 years who completely screwed the country. But what there were old residential centres for disabled people. So the British, as colonial masters, had set up these homes for disabled people. So they still existed, but they'd been abandoned in terms of any resources, any funding, anything for decades. So you had these little communities of disabled people, incredibly impoverished. So really staggering poverty in the sense of they're just about growing enough food to survive or not. So
what does that look like when your boots on the ground? Because I think we all have an idea of what poverty is and what it looks like from probably rather ignorantly from adverts asking for £2 a month on the TV. But when you're actually there, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? Do you have an issue to do you have problems computing that? Is it so alien?
Yeah. My problems, Andy, were always more when I came home.
Right.
weirdly, in some ways, that many of the people I've met in all of those years were incredibly kind and gentle, and they lived the lives they lived, but with nothing to eat, or just living from hand to foot and sleeping lots of people in one room with the few scraps of clothing they've got on. I did meet some people actually later. I worked for Comic Relief, and there was one particular slum I went into in Kampala. And I remember going to visit some disabled people. This is when AIDS had also kicked off, and a lot of disabled people got AIDS because they were almost all illiterate, because they wouldn't be going to school,
right,
because they're not included in the system.
And so they can't read any of the information.
Correct. And these were particularly often deaf people as well. So if there's anything on the radio, you're not hearing it. So, so you know nothing.
Right.
So whole sections of the disabled people were wiped out by AIDS, and including many of the organisations that we'd supported for years.
Right.
So all of the people that I worked with a bit later in Zambia, the leadership of all the organisations, well, actually not just the leadership, all died of AIDS, because nobody knew anything about them. And just because they're physically disabled or deaf or blind doesn't mean they don't have sex. And they had families and so on and so on. So it spread through like wildfire. But there were people I visited there who were, when you talk about smell, I just remember going into one house, it just hit me. It's like, right, because there's somebody living in the corner in a pile of shit, basically.
Right.
And who's not being looked after at all. Seeing this little, I can still see his face, it's because his teeth were sort of sticking out of his head in a very sort of skeletal look. Yeah, and that is much more shocking, because what do you say? Because you can't actually do anything in the immediacy. Well, there's very little you can kind of do.
Right.
That person died not long afterwards, but it's kind of like what we were about was trying to change the system. It was about trying to get rights for disabled people, you see what I mean? So it wasn't about, as I said before in a way, it wasn't about here's 10 quid, let me help you. Yeah. Let me give you some food. It wasn't about that. It was let's find a way that you can be brought in. Let's make it so that there's a percentage of disabled people who, by law, who have to be given jobs. Let's try and work with you to try and get some of you educated, so that you can start campaigning for rights, so that you are included, so that you can be given free transport on buses, so you can get to work even though you can't walk, or whatever it might be. So it was those long-term things. And the constant battle of that was that often we were working with people who didn't have anything to eat. So if you're saying to them, okay, let's have another meeting tomorrow to discuss how to do that, and they're kind of going, I can't do that. You've already spent all today talking about how we're going to set up an organisation. Now you want me to spend another day? I beg for a living.
Right.
If you take me off the street, or if I'm not on the street begging, what am I meant to eat?
Right.
And then do you start, well, often actually you do have to start supplying food at meetings or whatever, because otherwise people can't come.
Right.
Not don't want to, they recognise why they need to, but, But it's getting that balance right is really difficult, because otherwise you're back into charity.
See that as an opportunist thing then. Go,
of course.
I'm meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
And they come and they eat the food, and then nothing happens.
And the people who get elected into the organisations then start paying themselves, because there is some money coming into that organisation, and then you get into the situation where they keep their jobs. Yeah. It's technically a democratic organisation, but they make bloody sure they keep the job, because with the job comes, I don't know, the food at meetings.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But hard.
Yeah. Crazy. Is this around the time the Catholic Church was spreading this misinformation around condoms and contraception with the AIDS thing?
Yeah, it would have been in Uganda. Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of stuff happened with AIDS, wasn't it?
It's just the worst thing ever.
I know. Well, there was so much misinformation, and the South African president who went down a route of it's not happening, and either.
We're seeing that today with COVID, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in Tanzania, there's an evangelical president who's heavily into God, but and you can't get you can come to church. It doesn't spread in church. The coronavirus, incidentally, it's you're fine coming to church.
Is that the fellow that just died?
No, I don't think so.
I did see. Maybe it's a bit of a meme, but I saw a thing of a a preacher, a very evangelical type
Okay.
preacher who said, "Oh no, it's
Can't
okay. It's not, this and that."
Mm.
And then he got it and died.
Tanzania's got a massive, as I understand it, a huge coronavirus problem. Uganda, which went down okay, let's lock everything down. Let's really, do this properly, in inverted commas, do this WHO way. Have had one person die so far. That's a neighbouring country, And then, of course, a huge problem of people crossing a border because they're very porous borders. People fleeing Tanzania and, of course, then bringing the virus with them. But anyway.
So when did you move on from this sort of...
I moved on from that world because we had Ben and Amy, my children, partly, and I was away all the time, or a lot of the time, and I wanted to be in Frome.
You didn't want to miss them growing up?
I didn't want to miss them growing up, and so I started working more here, and then I phased out of Action on Disability and Development. I say phased out, I went part-time first, and then I stopped working for them. And then I started working for other charities who were Britain-based or British-based. Primarily, I did a sort of, which way round is this, poacher turned gamekeeper. I think, is that what I mean? Anyway, instead of applying to people for money, I started working for Comic Relief. So I moved to an organisation which was raising money and then distributing it to charities like Action on Disability and Development. Because actually I'd written lots of applications, so I knew how to read. I knew how to read people's applications and go, that's not what you're really saying, is it? So I became an assessor of applications, and then I started various funding streams within Comic Relief.
Right. What kind of wool would people attempt to pull over your eyes in that situation? So what are some things that jump to mind when you think that is particularly sneaky, sir?
I suppose that there is always a thing about how much money you're using to run your organisation versus how much money is going to the people. And Comic Relief was always very, very good at recognising that it costs money to run an organisation, and if you haven't got a functioning organisation, it doesn't work. You can't just send all the money to a group of impoverished people and expect them to cope with it. You have to have structure. But is there a limit to how much it costs? I mean, there is a limit to how much it costs. And some would be paying perhaps far more than they need to, most particularly around having expats in the country, so that they'd have British people working in whatever country it is, paid whatever, 30, 40, 50 grand a year, when you could have had a lot more local people, because with every expat, often there was a whole package of, fees to move them back and forward from Britain and funding for their children to be in school here and. So it could be massive, as a percentage of the cost. So looking out for them. There was one of the things I realised early on is that the notes on people's budgets, they often forget to delete. So they send you the budget, and particularly on Excel spreadsheets, there's a tiny little red dot which has got the notes in. There's one I particularly remember, which when I focused on the red dot, it said, I've put in 2 Land Rovers, but I don't think I'll get away with it.
So what do you do? Do you pull these people up on that then?
No.
Or do you just
I didn't tell them about the red dot. I just said, so I noticed you put in two Land Rovers. I'm not sure you'll need that as many as that. And then I can't remember this, but I presumably, oh no, you're probably right. Maybe we don't.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, no, totally, yeah. Don't know why I did that. So I'm assuming after that you became an undertaker. Was that always been a theme? A theme. You know what I'm saying?
So, yeah, death has always been a theme. Death is a theme. It's the only thing we can be sure of, Andy. There's some famous phrase, isn't there, about taxes and death being the only thing we can be sure of. But actually, I'm not so sure about the taxes. You don't have, you can probably get away without paying them. No, death is always there. I've always been interested in death because my mum died 1976, I think. So anyway, whatever that is, 35 years ago, something like that. We lived my dad worked and we lived in Northern Ireland at that time, but her family were in England and her body was flown to England at huge expense. And then we had a cremation in a crematorium near Oxford, which was completely hopeless for everyone, with a vicar, I imagine, who didn't know my mum at all. He did get her name right, I think, but I'm not even sure about that. And then we went to a pub and had crap food, and my mum was really into nice food. And it was kind of like, oh, this is terrible.
It was not the correct
this is
out.
No, this has served nobody well. So I've always had that in the back of my mind, and always felt that we could do things better. And the whole funeral industry still is, to a large extent. I mean, I know we haven't got there but it's a bit like the whole world of politics. It's in some ancient century.
Right.
All the black stuff, all of that, that was all invented by the Victorians. It doesn't have to be like, you can do anything you like.
It doesn't have to be so morose.
Yeah. No, and actually it turns out that to set yourself up as an undertaker, you need a mobile phone. I mean, there's no qualifications, there's no anything. Actually, there are three of us who run Greenwood Funerals, one of whom had done a lot more funerals for many years, and then two of us who hadn't. And we did go and do training in how to do things, particularly in how to what you need to do legally in terms of arranging things. But there's very little you need to do legally. Actually, you can use your own car in a funeral. You can be buried in all sorts. You can be buried in your own garden. You can do almost anything. But people think we have to do all these things, and then they get ripped off terribly.
I see.
So I've been interested in how we could do things in a way which matched somebody's life and what their family really wanted, and how you could do things without. At a moment when people are incredibly vulnerable, exploiting that financially. So the way that we do get around that is by charging a fee related to what we put into it, and then all the costs go exactly, what I pay, they pay. Because what normally happens in most, but not all, but nearly all undertakers is that you tell me you want a wicker coffin and I'll tell you that's £1,000.
Right.
But actually, it only cost me 300.
Right.
So I've just made a 300% markup for picking up the phone and ordering it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really naughty. Because and what's more, I'll make more money selling you a wooden box, let's say.
Yeah.
So I'll persuade you towards the wooden box. And actually, you should be able to choose what you want for your mum or whoever it might be, not what I'm going to make the most money on. Anyway.
I used to work for a marquee company. I'm not going to name the marquee company. But I heard a story on the yard that someone had requested two pub-style benches. I'm not sure what their correct name is. You know, the benches where they're all as one section. You got the table and the benches combined. And the owner didn't have any as part of his repertoire, I guess, as his inventory, his stock. So he just went to Homebase or wherever you buy them, bought two, and then charged them the price of what he bought them for the rental. Which is naughty, isn't it?
It is naughty. But the world is full of that, and I'm afraid that the world of undertakers or undertaking is full of that. Because you're at such a vulnerable moment.
Yes. Well, emotionally, yeah. For whoever's, I guess there's probably many situations where the family member or the next of kin who comes in to see you, it's actually maybe kind of glad they're gone, but that's probably in the minority, and most of the time you're dealing with bereavement, aren't you?
Yeah, of course you are, and well, obviously shock. Yeah, but I mean, you're right that one of the things that training taught me is never to make assumptions. And one of them being, that when somebody phones you and say, can I talk to you? My husband's just died, or whatever it is, not to say I'm so sorry, because they may not be,
Right.
So it's kind of the answer. It's like, so how can I help you? Because who knows?
That's such a thin line to walk, isn't it? Between coming across as being very cold and uncaring, and actually just being very professional. Very down the line, because I mean, in some cases, you want that. You don't want someone who's going to counsel you on the phone.
No, you want someone who you feel is a sort of rock, who's going to sort of hold you, and you can really trust that this is going to go right. I mean, I'm doing one at the moment, and what she wanted to hear, I'm sure, is, look, don't worry, relax. I have this in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, I will arrange that. I will talk to the people, at the place you want to get your husband buried, which is miles away, and you don't need to worry about that. And
I've got this.
Yeah, we've got, exactly. And that's what people need to hear, I think, and feel confident. And there's a very useful phrase that my colleague told me about, shared with me, which is false intimacy.
Right.
Avoiding false intimacy, because I like to be liked, and I was definitely guilty of it in the funeral she was talking about, in the arranging of sort of becoming too much somebody's friend.
Right.
And actually, like you say, that's not actually what they want either.
You can almost make that worse then, I guess.
Yeah. Well,
you join in their misery.
Yeah.
And it gets...
That's not what they need at that moment.
Cyclical.
They don't need a mate telling stories or whatever. They need to know that somebody's going to, as you say, got this.
Yeah. Let me put this on record right now. If I die an untimely death, Peter, you're my guy.
Thank you very much.
There we go. Thanks.
There's quite a few people in Frome whose funerals we have lined up in that sense, but with no expectation. I quite like talking. It's good to have that conversation,
Yeah.
And think about it, even when you're only 32 like you.
28. I feel 32. Not that that's that old, but yeah. Did you have any reservations before going into being a funeral director where you were like, this is maybe a little macabre for me? Were you worried that it might affect your enjoyment of life, being so surrounded by reminders that it's going to end, and it could end any day, any time, in any way, painful, dignified, or however way?
There's two questions in there.
Yeah.
And it's not could, it's would. But anyway, it will.
Yeah.
So there's... no, I don't think... I was never worried about it bringing me closer to death in that sense, because actually I welcome that. I think, as I say, our society's terrible at avoiding death and not
we do avoid
talking
it.
About it. Yeah.
There are cultures that dig up their relatives every 10 years, give them new clothes, parade them around the city, or the town, whatever, put cigarettes in their mouths, and it's horrendous, really. But for them, it's completely normal.
But why is it? Yeah,
maybe it's not horrendous, but when you first see it, you think that's horrendous.
Yeah.
But to them, it makes sense, and that's all it really. Yeah, but we do tend to sort of shy away from it, and there are cultures that spend their whole lives preparing for it.
Yeah, why not?
So a part of life is death.
Yeah, because at least in theory, and I think it's true, you're likely to live your life more fully if you're aware that this is it. I mean, it's not going to be here forever. And I do wonder what some of these despots we have in positions of power, like Trump, does he think? He must think he's immortal. He can't be thinking he's about to die. Otherwise, surely, he wouldn't do some of the things he does. I don't know, but I think it helps.
He's
to
quite
have that in mind.
a specimen, isn't he?
He's quite a specimen.
We could spend a whole hour talking about.
I shouldn't have mentioned. I'm sorry, I mentioned him.
But he's taller than I think a lot of people think. He's about 6'5". He's 70 something. I'm not a Trump fan. Don't get me. That sounds like I'm reeling off his statistics like he's like some famous baseball player or something. I'm not a Trump fan, but he's quite a physical specimen, isn't he? He's old. My granddad was dead at 72. Trump was running for president around that sort of age. 6'5". It's kind of impressive, but you get all the best care, don't you, when you're in that?
I suppose so, but mentally you're at your peak at 28, not 70 something.
I do feel like I'm at my peak right now, actually, saying that. I feel like 30's coming. I've had 25 years to have fun, dick around, do this and that, figure it out. And now I'm in let's go time.
Great.
I'm like, there's Henry Rollins from Black Flag says there's no downtime, only lifetime. So every time I've got some downtime at the moment, I'm like, Harry, let's get some pods in. Let's do it. Let's go. I've already been talking to the people. Let's sort it out. I'm just hitting it hard at the moment. It's great.
Excellent.
So you'll always be in a job, won't you, as an undertaker? That's the thing.
Yep. Bit like a hairdresser.
Yes. And who else is always going to have a job? What's the other industry that will always have a job? Farmers, I guess, to a degree.
Yeah, I suppose so. Although our farming industry is in a terrible state because the average age of our farmers is 60-something, and we don't pay enough for our food.
Their kids are growing up and going, you know what? You work really hard. You're fucked. I can see it. Look at that back.
Yeah.
I'm off to university.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do something else.
You only have to be in the countryside on a Sunday evening and hearing all the tractors and think, what? Or on a bank holiday Monday, and then they're still out there, aren't they? They never stop.
Never. Yeah, you know Owen, don't you? Owen Singer.
Yeah.
From Penley. He's one of the hardest working guys I know. Farm, shop. It's just, I've got to get him on the pod actually because he's got some serious scrapes with death on the farm. It's a podcast in itself.
Yeah.
Chlorine poisoning. I think he made a gas one day in one of the, I don't know what he was doing. He was doing something, mixed something wrong and almost gassed himself to death in one of his barns or something. I don't know, crazy. Fell into grain silos. That's a way out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's magnificent.
Drowned in grain.
So we've talked about your your business in death, but the real interesting stuff is the Flatpack Democracy and the retaking of local politics, of which I am, I guess, a big part of now. Where did this begin? What's the inception of this? Because this is, as you said, is your producer role in its fullest extent, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is in terms of being in the background in some of the time, and then I've got pushed to the foreground for a while. The roots are the same. They're social justice. They're recognising, I suppose, that the people who have the power are not using it well. And the people who don't have the power are disengaged and not involved and don't even know that they have power to take. You see what I mean? So I'm not saying that, the Council of Frome was abusing its power particularly when I got involved. But I am saying that they were fairly unambitious and didn't do as much as they might have done. And my entry to this was being involved in environmental stuff. So I'd ran Sustainable Frome, which is a transition town movement, if that means anything to anyone, which is a sort of network of organisations across Britain and the world of groups of people wanting to do stuff environmentally. And I'd got involved in that in Frome, and one of the things that one looked to do was to go to the council and say, hey, how can we work together? And particularly, what's your strategy on things like climate change and peak oil and, a changing world environmentally? And the council didn't have any strategy. They just ran the park. And there was no real interest in having any strategy. And I was also interested in I was involved in Vision for Frome. I was interested in it, but which was the government-funded consultations, research, whatever, in market towns all over Britain. Market towns and coastal towns, because both had really suffered. When the market moved out of Frome, and suddenly, every Wednesday there weren't farmers and their wives and families coming and spending money and all the rest. That was a real death knell to the town. So this bit of work called Vision for Frome, which I was involved in, asking people what they wanted to do. So I knew that there was a lot of ambition, there were lots of ideas and so on. And then I found that there was a council which really wasn't interested. They were like most councils, primarily involved in small town things and twinning and, and political infighting particularly between the Tories and Lib Dems, although there had been Labour councils here as well. And a group of us, so I was kind of drawn into a group really by Mel Usher, who was the equivalent in many ways of those other leaders, if you like. Mel was very much the front man in lots of ways, or the man with the ideas, the director of Independence for Frome. So he drew me into a conversation with a bunch of people who I didn't know at the time, which became initially, should we introduce some ideas? Should we try and up the game with this bunch of people? I certainly had no intention of standing as a councillor. But then it sort of rolled into, well, should we have some fun and actually see if we could get some councillors elected? And then so that was like only a few months before the election in 2011. And people said, yeah, but only if we can have fun. And the guy who said he'd do the signs for us said, yeah, but only if they're not square. So then we had signs around Frome, which were voice bubble shaped. And if turns out to be really useful. If not now, when? If only.
Yeah.
There was a guy who helped us with marketing, but he said we need to make it really clear. So we put the one we said B ... if outside his house, as in Biff, which is kind of like, what the hell does that mean? Anyway. But so we had a lot of fun doing that, and then suddenly found ourselves running a council because we won 10 out of 17 seats.
Yeah.
Which wasn't as planned. But absolutely central to that were two things. One was that we said, let's set out how we will work together, our ways of working, our ethos, our vision, if you like. No, it's not quite our vision, actually. It's our ethos. It's how we as individuals will behave. And central to that is that we won't behave like Westminster. This won't be all about confrontation. Disagree, by all means, but then, and have our discussions, our arguments and so on. But at the end of that argument, let's properly listen to each other. If I need, I don't know anything about punk music. It makes no sense for me to suddenly be a representative of Oakfield Road on whether Frome should have, punk delivered throughout the town. I should be seeking information from somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah.
That was it seemed so obvious to us that you should bring in the town. And that was the other bit, that you use much more participation. So we wanted participative democracy. So constant proper engagement and involvement and sharing of the power, and not representation. So not the usual thing, which is Andy gets elected and then you never hear of him until about a month before the next election, when suddenly you're all over the papers and, telling us all these wonderful things you've done and so on and so on. And then you get elected again and it goes on and on forever. But, we wanted to have something which was a constant engagement. You do it for a few years, 4 or 8, if you get re-elected, and then you go on and do something else,
Yeah. That's part of the ethos as well, is that you're not there so long that it becomes almost not a career politician, but it shares many parallels with that, doesn't it? It becomes sort of your gig, if you will, and you can't. It doesn't allow you to get stale or complacent, or even maybe arrogant. Although it's very easy to get arrogant in 8 years, I'd say. But but that's the general.
Absolutely, and that you should remain absolutely part of the community as far as possible. You're not any different. I found it, I don't know if you found it weird how when you became a councillor and suddenly people treat you differently. It's like, councillor this and councillor, and never mind when you're the mayor, Andy, you'll find this. But it's that sort of almost bowing down to you,
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Hello, councillor. Hello, Mr. Mayor. And I get lots of, should we be courtesying you now and stuff like that, which is kind of like nice and funny and like, it's a compliment, isn't it? It's flattery.
But is it not a bit weird?
But it is weird. No, totally, it's weird.
Yeah, because one day you're just Andy, serving me in the co-op, and the next minute you get elected, and you're somebody, you've changed, but you haven't. I think that's a real problem, actually.
Yeah.
Because it means that people treat you differently. And I remember at our first council meetings, there's a guy who, I'm not sure he's still alive, but him coming in who wanted to ask us something and standing up and first, and he was his papers were shaking, and he said, thank you so much for allowing me to speak. And you're thinking, well, I think it's like I or somebody said, hang on. First of all, you don't need to stand up. Do stand up if you want to, but you don't need to. And actually, there's no need to thank us. It's your council.
Yeah, we're here for you. This is like we're doing.
It's like, and we're doing this. We should be doing it together.
Yeah.
And why is it really that different from being a school governor? So, I mean, the college has a budget of what? I don't know, 20 million a year or something? I mean, 20 times the council's? That's a guess. It might be 10 million. But, what's more important, the education of a whole generation of Frome's youth or the town council? But who can name any one of the governors of the college, or who gives it, it's like... Yeah. I've never understood that. To me, there's a number of organisations in the town and they have different roles. The council is one of them. Yeah. It's no more important or not.
Yeah, I get this a lot when people go, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you taking it. My time isn't money. My time is not money. I have a day job.
Yes.
Just like most of us. My time outside of that is not money. You're taking my time right now because I put myself up for election. I knew what I was getting into, and that involved talking to you today. I like the respect. I like people to be respectful and courteous. I like that. I do like that, and we all like that. But yeah, you don't have to thank me for my time. No. I'm not sat there looking at my watch going, this is my time is money right now. I don't know.
Well, that was one of the things which you'll know, Andy. We did every other council, not every other, but nearly every other council has this thing where the public can only speak for a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting. Normally they have to book in. So you have to, phone up the town clerk or whatever and say, I need 2 minutes to talk about the bike lane in such and such a place. Then you're called forward, you stand up, you do your 2 minutes, and then the councillors don't even have to thank you. They don't have to say anything. They don't have, so, and then it's like, next. And often in many councils, they don't thank you or anything.
Right.
They just ignore
bullshit.
You. And it's such bullshit. And when we took that away, we said, okay, for a start, if you want to talk about an agenda item, you can do it at the agenda item, not just in the public bit. Because otherwise people have forgotten your comment at the beginning when an hour later you'd reach the agenda item. But also, you can talk for as long as you want. Yeah. And the answer was, or people said, oh God, you're going to get some nutters who'll go on and on and on. In all my times as a councillor, nobody ever abused that because we treated them as, human beings. And sometimes as the chair, I probably did go, okay, Andy, we've got it now. But in a nice way, I'd say, okay, I think we've got that point now. And it'd be great, if there's anything else you want to say, do let us know. Da, 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 da. But it wasn't shut up and sit down.
I kind of like nutters as well a little bit.
They're really important.
Yeah.
Especially in a small town.
I find, yeah. And that is that's the small town aspect of it as well, is that, if we're sat in here and you present your piece and we don't even say thank you or pass a comment or acknowledge it, I have to face you out in that big wide world. I have to bump into you in the street. I have to live amongst you. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to be...
No.
Do you know what I mean? You're my neighbour, basically. So acknowledge them.
Exactly.
Talk to them. I guarantee I'm going to see them 3 times this week after that.
Yeah, well, you
there's
definitely
no
will,
way I'm going to brush you off.
Yeah,
do you know what I
yeah.
mean? So.
You may remember Charles Wood, or do you remember? He was a Tory. He was a Tory who always wanted to be a councillor and never quite got elected. But he came to lots
Tory
and lots
not
of
getting
meetings.
elected.
Yeah,
Jesus.
But he was the chair of aforementioned Vision for FROME. So he'd done a huge amount of work. And he came to the council, presented the report to them, had his 2 minutes to present it, and nobody even thanked him. There was even if they thanked him, there was no discussion at all. And it's like, it was 80,000 quid's worth of consultation with the community.
Yeah.
Has anybody read it? He was furious. I mean, and half the council at that time were Tory. But he just... and that was partly why he always privately bought into what I and others were saying. We should do this differently, because he felt it's just so rude.
It's rude. And to be a Tory and have, I guess, a majority Tory council, not even. That's just, it's unacceptable.
It's wrong.
It?
Yeah.
Whichever left
whichever
or right,
party,
whichever you lean.
It's wrong, because we do all live in the same community, and people really care about things, don't they? And you or I may not really care that much about, I don't know, whether a tree is or isn't being properly tied up in such and such a playground. But if that person planted it, or I don't know, they planted it in memory of their wife who died or something, of course, you really do need to care or listen to to them, because it's just all wrong not to. And as you say, these are the people we live with, like it or not.
Yes. And this is why the independents this is the inception, is so that you don't have representatives who are answering to a party line or answering to a head office in London or wherever.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of putting up independent candidates, to challenge the party, the status quo of the party politics.
Absolutely.
In small towns. Is it your plan? Was it your ambition to take districts, take county levels, infiltrate Parliament? Is there a long game in this, Peter?
Initially, no. So I always said that this won't work at a higher level, that you need that local bit, because on the doorstep, what you're saying to people is, I'm Andy, vote for me, or in my case, I suppose I should be saying, I'm Peter. I'm Peter, vote for me. I don't know what my policy is, because I'm going to come back to you.
Yeah.
So you need to trust me, and you need to, trust that this is how I will work with you and my colleagues. And that's a bit of a leap. It's a particular leap if there's a bigger budget. So let's say you do control roads or schools, large numbers of millions of quid, the bypass or whatever. If somebody says, so what are you going to do about the bypass? And your answer is, well, I haven't made my mind up. I'll come back to you later. And it's kind of all a bit, but I don't trust you, because you could be going to say anything, and you could have all got together. You could have a policy which nobody likes. So I always felt it'll never work at a higher level. We did register a political party in order to be able to stand up Mendip, but we never used it. The plan was to try and independentize, or whatever you might call it, Shepton Mallet, Glastonbury, Wells, all the other local towns. But then, even if you won every seat in those, which would be really difficult, and then you formed some sort of coalition, you still haven't got a majority, because there's this huge rural hinterland of Tories who've been there forever. And how do you, walk up a long farm drive and knock on a door and try and get somebody, to vote, or go to the pub where, the district councillor goes to that pub too. Yeah. And they've always been there and you haven't, and you go in and say, vote for me, I'm an independent. It's not going to work, is it?
Yeah.
So I could never see a way of doing it. What's changed a bit is that people have done it. So people have stood, particularly they've got a really strong town base, and then they've also stood at district or at county. Uh-huh. But they've and got in. There are some really good county councillors now, or unitary councillors, who've got in like that. But they've always got in as in part of a coalition. Right. So in a sense, it's luck. And the cases I'm thinking of, they're part of anybody but the Tories coalition. Essentially, right? So what's it called? Bournemouth, Poole, and Christchurch. I might have got those in the wrong order. Which is a new unitary. There's two independents who are on the cabinet of that, who got in like that. Right. So I said it's a complete waste of time. I don't know why you're bothering, and I've had to eat my hat. There they are, running a show.
You're quite happy to be proven wrong there, though.
I'm very happy to be proven wrong. I think making mistakes and being proven wrong is really important. It sounds like I'm actually advocating making mistakes, which I'm not, but I'm definitely advocating taking risks. When Mel often said, we won't kill anyone. At this level, we won't kill anyone. We're not making decisions that are going to have a huge impact. Whether we put planters on the Boyle Cross or don't put them on the Boyle Cross.
Don't get me started with that.
Well, but he won't kill anyone. So actually, why not do the thing why not do something which may be unpopular, just do it, risk it, sometimes, and push the boat out a bit and get involved in things which town councils don't normally do. Is really important. And then when you do make mistakes, I made one in particular, I can probably in this room actually, saying, and I don't get cross for it a lot, but I got kind of fed up with everyone questioning my pushing for. This was to fund it was going to be a real state-of-the-art database that could have every organisation in the voluntary sector in Frome on it, and all up to date and really work, plus all sorts of bells and whistles. And the first, I think it was $5,000, might have been 10. Anyway, we needed another 10 grand. Or something like that. And a lot of people were saying, look, we've spent the first 10, it hasn't worked. Ooh, how do we know it's going to work? And I was going, look, we spent the first 10. If we spend the next 10, it'll definitely work. And I remember saying, look, just trust me, and everyone said, oh, all right, okay. So we gave them the money and it didn't work. But there were lots of things which we could then learn from that. And I, again, had to kind of go, look, I was wrong. I made this decision based on these things, which at the time I felt was absolutely right, because this is what we needed. I wasted, £1 ahead of the people of Frome. I'm sorry. But I think it's more, personally, I'd rather do that and be wrong sometimes than constantly going, oh, God. We don't want to be re-elected. If you're, as an independent, your motivation shouldn't be wanting to be re-elected. So you should be prepared to make unpopular decisions, I think.
Right.
Get it wrong.
Radical.
Admit it.
Yeah.
That's what we do in ordinary life, isn't it? Why should politics be any different?
Yeah. I think it's because our view of politics is of national and global politics. And I've got to admit, when I didn't know anything about local politics, I learned about local politics while I was running for election. I think about that now, that's batshit crazy. It's nuts. But someone opened a door to me based off me joking about being the mayor of Frome. And these were serious people, I thought, that were opening doors to me. I thought, well, they see something here. And I'd be stupid not to go through and explore it. Glad I did. But I didn't know anything about it. And in reading comments on Facebook, in the FROME group and other things, just as well as I do, you look through that comment section, 80% of them are incorrect.
Yeah.
Believe that we have powers that we don't have.
Yep.
And get very passionate for
so
10 minutes.
Yeah. So where's the education system? Why is that not part of the college? It only would have to be a small part of something that you learn at college, or but because it's not just about freedom, is it? And people that have no idea how the system works, they have no idea how the national system works. And when you get to something like Brexit, which for me went wrong because people didn't know what they were doing.
Didn't know what they were voting for.
No.
I got to admit, I probably wouldn't have at that moment. I couldn't vote for it. I was at Glastonbury.
Right.
And I was called up to go work at Glastonbury at very short notice. So I couldn't do any postal vote or anything like that. And I said I wasn't massively politically aware at that point. I was just kind of doing my thing, trying to make some of it myself, trying to explore different things. And I think that was maybe a watershed moment for a lot of people.
Sure.
After that, you woke up that next day and you went, oh,
maybe I should have voted.
What's going on now?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you've become the mayor of Frome. You have a nice time doing that. You ran for, did you do 4 years or 8?
8. Yeah.
And then you wrote the Bible of independent politics, Flatpack Democracy.
I'm not quite sure it's the Bible, but
I'm quoting you here. I think you called it the Bible.
No, I never would have called it the Bible. I've just had problems with someone. I'm doing a podcast, not podcast. I'm doing a workshop in Australia, and she's advertised as I'm advertised as the legend of local politics. I've said, hang on. Most legends are dead. And and it's like, I do not. Please remove the word legend. Anyway,
gunslinger.
It's no. I wrote Flatpack Democracy halfway through actually, because it was basically how to take power. Persuaded by somebody, by a publisher, that it was a good story, and he was right in that. My modesty didn't like the idea of putting this forward in that way. But what I realised is that because we'd done it, it actually made a difference, and so we and that story have inspired a lot of other places, and it has changed a lot of the ways that other places are run. And then more recently, I wrote Flatpack 2, which is basically, so what? So what did Frome actually do? Did it really make a difference? And then also the initial, the second movers. So what have they done? What of things like those ways of working I mentioned, the values, what versions of other people produced, what variants of the theme? Because wrongly, in a way, we called Flatpack a DIY manual. It's not really meant to be that. It's not meant to be an IKEA, follow exactly these instructions. It's meant to be, here's an idea, or here's a whole set of ideas. Take what's useful for you, adapt and evolve as you wish. And that, of course, is what other people have done.
And so beyond those books, which have sold very well, you now have the Flatpack Democracy website. You're expanding into social media. What is this? I'm hesitant to say empire, but what is it becoming? Because Flatpack Democracy seems to be becoming a movement now, or an organisation, or some sort of umbrella term, which you are overseeing.
It's a cult, Andy.
It's a cult. That's the word I was looking for, Peter.
There is no.
Where's that Kool-Aid?
There is no T-shirt, therefore it's not a cult. So the top end of democracy is completely and utterly hopeless It's an unmitigated disaster. And I say that, I don't even care which party's in. But now we've got a bunch of people elected by 30% of the population who are there whether we like it or not for 8 years, or 5 years, sorry. But it's insane. So we can't do anything about it. And they will never vote for Christmas, i.e. they're turkeys who will never vote for Christmas. And so they're never going to change it. The Labour Party wouldn't change it when they had power. So nobody's going to change the system. So for me, the only way to rectify the system is to try and get as many pixels, as many little dots of hope over the whole country as we can. There's 10,000 parish and town councils. So if all of them were made functional, I don't care what they're called. I don't actually want the cult. I don't care whether they're Flatpack or not. If they actually realised they could change people's lives and could play an incredibly important role in their local community and took that on, and in the process we got younger people, particularly younger people from different backgrounds. The average councillor is an old white man. They're me, not you, and they're definitely not black or from any other minority group. So if we could change that and get a properly representative layer across the country that was really doing stuff, then maybe a national government would see that, because that's 10,000 times 20 councillors. Well, let's say an average of 10. I mean, it's 100,000 councillors, but they represent everybody. So if they're kind of going, actually, you know what, climate change exists and we need to take it seriously, then maybe a government looking at all that lot would kind of go, we need to respond to this lot, because if we do something totally averse to what the people are saying and we've got an election coming, then we're in the shit. So I don't know. It's like, offer me something else that might work. I mean, Guy Fawkes isn't going to work. I mean, that didn't end well.
No,
certainly didn't end well for Guy. So violent revolution is definitely not an option. Starting a new party, there are 70 new parties in the last elections in Britain. None of them got any votes. Yeah. Nobody ever gets any votes outside of the national parties. So you can't take the system. So for me, this is the only way. So this is national and then world domination, starting at a community level.
I love it. Thanks very much for coming on. I got one other thing for you. It's more of a what's the word? More of an intrigue to scratch an itch. When the eve before the election, I posted on my Facebook wall a photoshopped image of Terminator 2, my head on it, and it said, "Come with me, with the if logo, if you want to vote," right? And that was kicking off. It was going viral. People were loving it. People were also hating it. Some people were getting hung up on the gun. They didn't like it. You liked it. Why did you like it? And you wrote about it in the book, but it didn't make the cut. And this is what I want to know, because I've always been intrigued about what you would have said about that section of the campaign in your book. You cut it.
Okay. I'm sorry it didn't make the cut.
It's okay.
I did, and I do love the picture. For me, that was the pirate bit.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to put out things that provoke conversation. And it might, I don't know what you thought about the gun bit. It might have been that afterwards, even if you hadn't been pushed that way, you might have gone, okay, I can see that maybe people might have taken offense. I can see that wasn't wise, but the general image,
this is the pun, basically. Yeah, it's a bit exactly. of fun for me. But the gun was really divisive.
Yeah, I know. Personally, I was definitely with you. I love all that sort of pushing the boat out and doing things differently, and that, incidentally, because I haven't mentioned them before, is what the pirates were. The image that they were given was by the British state. They were way ahead of their time. Up to 60% of most of the big boats were black. The difference between what the captains earned and the cabin boy was 4 times. In the co-op, it's 10 times. The radical organisations in Britain, they were doing some fantastic things. They put some of all the bounty to one side for if anybody got injured. They had a social services. They gave black people. They had rights for black people. They were sharing the bounty. They were way ahead of their times. And so, I think being out there as different images the reason why you potentially, have already been, but can be way, way more interesting as a councillor, is by pushing those boundaries, I think, and getting people who would never get involved in this sort of thing involved. Doesn't mean they have to like guns, but it means they have to be thinking people.
Yeah.
And the more wacky images and madness, the better.
I think you can leave it there. That's a great end. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Giant Pod with me, Andy Wrintmore. That was Peter Mcfadyen. Please don't forget to check out the links to all things Flatpack Democracy in the show note descriptions. Like, subscribe, leave us a little review. If you want to follow my antics on Instagram, you can at Andy_S1S. This podcast was produced by the indomitable Harry Williams. Please check us out next week on The Giant Pod.